The story you're about to hear changed the course of Black history forever. Welcome to Black History Stories 13, your home for powerful, true stories. Before we begin, please like, share, subscribe, and tap that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. And don't forget, share this video with your family and friends because our stories deserve to be heard. Now, let's get into it. The true story of Frederick Douglass, the slave who taught himself to read and changed America. Frederick Douglass was born into slavery in 1818 on a Maryland plantation, and from the very beginning, life tried to define who he was allowed to be. He never knew the exact date of his birth. He barely knew his mother. And like millions of enslaved people, he was told every day that he was property, not a person. But Frederick Douglass was born with something nobody could take away. A mind that refused to bow down and a hunger for freedom that burned hotter than any fire. Early years. A young boy with questions. As a child, Frederick noticed things that didn't make sense. Why did the white children learn to read, but enslaved children were forbidden? Why were enslaved people punished for speaking up, or even looking like they were thinking too much? These questions grew in his mind. When he was about 8 years old, Douglass was sent to Baltimore to live with Hugh and Sophia Auld. And this is where his destiny shifted. Sophia Auld, who had never owned a slave before, began teaching Frederick the alphabet. The moment her husband discovered this, he exploded. If you teach a slave to read, he will become unfit to be a slave. Those words woke something up inside Frederick Douglass. If reading made a slave unfit for slavery, then reading was the key to freedom. The secret student. From that day on, Douglass turned the streets of Baltimore into his classroom. White children became his unwitting teachers as he challenged them. I bet I can read this better than you. I bet you don't even know this word. He learned by trickery, by mimicry, by pure brilliance. He read newspapers, scraps of books, anything he could get his hands on. And slowly, the world opened to him. He began to understand the system that held his people in chains. He began to understand the evil of slavery and the humanity of himself. He read speeches, essays, and ideas that shaped his identity. I am not a slave, I am a man. The slave breaker. Realized Frederick Douglass was thinking for himself, they grew fearful. They sent him to Edward Covey, a man known as the slave breaker. Covey's job was to destroy a person from the inside out, mentally, spiritually, physically. For months, Douglass was beaten, starved, worked nearly to death, and pushed to his breaking point. He almost gave up. But one day, when Covey tried to tie him down and beat him, Douglass fought back. For 2 hours, they wrestled. Frederick refused to surrender, and something miraculous happened. Covey quit. Douglass later wrote, open quote, "From that day forward, I was a slave in form only, but not in fact." Close quote. He had reclaimed his manhood. The daring escape. Over the next few years, Douglass carefully planned his escape. He observed ships. He learned to forge sailors' papers. He studied maps. And on September 3rd, 1838, disguised as a free black sailor, Frederick Douglass boarded a northbound train. One wrong glance, one suspicious officer, one unlucky moment, and it would have been over. But he made it. He arrived in New York City a free man. And the shocking thing is, he was only 20 years old, the unstoppable voice of freedom. Freedom was just the beginning. Douglass became a writer, an orator, and one of the most powerful voices in American history. He told the truth about slavery so plainly, so forcefully, that audiences sometimes doubted he had ever been enslaved, because they couldn't believe a former slave could speak with such brilliance. He proved them wrong every time he opened his mouth. His autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, shook the nation. He advised presidents, influenced laws, and fought not only for black freedom, but for women's rights, education, and justice for all people. Frederick Douglass didn't just escape slavery. He exposed it. He fought it. He rose above it. And he made America face itself. The story behind Frederick Douglass's explosive 4th of July speech. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass stepped onto a stage in Rochester, New York, to deliver a keynote address for the Rochester Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. He had been invited to speak about the American 4th of July, a day celebrating independence, freedom, and the founding ideals of the United States. But Douglass, a formerly enslaved man, stood before an audience knowing that millions of black men, women, and children were still in chains. And he made a choice. He would not pretend that the 4th of July meant the same thing to everyone. Frederick Douglass starts with praise. But it's a setup. Douglass began softly, almost gently. He acknowledged the brilliance of the Founding Fathers. He honored their courage, their vision, and the principles they claimed to fight for: liberty, justice, and human rights. But as he spoke, his tone changed. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were being led into a moral trap, one that would expose the hypocrisy of the nation. Then comes the shakeup. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. At the height of his speech, Douglass stopped holding back. He looked directly at the audience, white abolitionists and sympathetic citizens, and delivered one of the most powerful lines in American history. Open quote, "This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn," close quote. With those words, he drew a sharp, painful line between freedom and enslavement, between America's ideals and America's reality. He asked his audience a question that echoed through time. Open quote, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" Close quote. And then he answered it himself. Open quote, "It is a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim." Close quote. He exposes the truth about slavery in front of America. In the middle of an American celebration, Douglass described the brutality of slave catchers, the separation of families, the torture that enslaved people faced, the hypocrisy of a nation claiming all men are created equal while holding millions captive. He compared the treatment of slaves to that of animals and asked, how can you celebrate freedom while millions are denied the right to their own bodies? It was a speech meant to bring discomfort, and he succeeded. A courageous public confrontation. Remember, this wasn't a speech given decades after slavery. It wasn't given when it was safe. This was 1852, 9 years before the Civil War, when speaking against slavery loudly and publicly could get a black man killed. Yet Douglass stood there, fearless, brilliant, and uncompromising. He refused to let America ignore the truth. A message of hope, not despair. Even after exposing the hypocrisy of the nation, Douglass didn't end with anger. He ended with hope. He said he believed slavery would end. He believed America was still capable of living up to its ideals. He believed the forces of justice were stronger than the forces of oppression. That balance of truth and hope is what made the speech unforgettable. Why the speech still matters today. Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech is studied worldwide because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. You can't celebrate freedom while denying freedom to others. It reminds us that patriotism is not blind worship. It's holding a country accountable to its highest values. Douglass's words still echo because America is still wrestling with the same issues he exposed in 1852.
Frederick Douglass, fellow citizens, pardon me and allow me to ask, why am I called to speak here today? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to those questions. 108 Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy cannot warm him? Who so adored and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude have been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak, and the lame man leap as in heart, but such is not the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pales of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? If so, there is a parallel to your conduct. Let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation Babylon, whose crimes towering up to heaven were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrecoverable ruin. Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy I hear the mournful wail of millions whose chains heavy and grievous yesterday are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilant shouts that reach them. If I do forget, if I do not remember those bleeding children of sorrow this day, may my right hand forget her cunning and may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. To forget them, to pass lightly over their wrongs and to chime in with the popular theme would be treason most sacrilegious and shocking and would make me a reproach before God and the world. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day and its popular characteristics from the slave's point of view. Standing here identified with the American bondsman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and bleeding slave on this occasion, I will in the name of humanity, which is outraged in the name of liberty, which is fettered in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded and trampled upon dare to call in question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command. And yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or who is not at heart a slaveholder shall not confess to be right and just. But I fancy, I hear some of my audience say it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression upon the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause would be much more likely to succeed. But I admit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? On what branch of the subject do the people of this country need light? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? That point is conceded already. Nobody doubts it. The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of laws for their government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia, which if committed by a black man, no matter how ignorant he be, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of these same crimes will subject a white man to like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual and responsible being? The manhood of the slave is conceded. It is admitted in the fact that Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of the slave to read and write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your street, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue with you that the slave is a man. For the present, it is enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race. Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting and reaping, using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in metal of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers that we are engaged in all the enterprises, common to other men, digging gold in California, capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planting, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all confessing and worshiping the Christian God and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave. We are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty, that he is the rightful owner of his body, and you have already declared it? Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is that a question for Republicans? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation? Is a matter, beset with great difficulty involving a doubtful application of the principle of justice, hard to understand? How should I look today in the presence of Americans dividing and subdividing, a discourse to show that men have a natural right to freedom, speaking of it, relatively and positively, negatively and affirmatively? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer an insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven who does not know that slavery is wrong for him. Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employment for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine, that God did not establish it, that our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? They that can, may. I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability, and could I reach the nation's ear, I would today pour out a fiery steam of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. And the conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed and its crimes against God and man must be denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than all other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty, an unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mocked, your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, a thin veil to cover up crimes, which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation of the earth, guilty of practices, more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go search where you will. Roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world. Travel through South America. Search out every abuse, and when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival.
Thank you for watching this powerful true story of Frederick Douglass, one of the greatest minds in American history. If you learned something today, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload from Black History Stories 13. Share this video with your family, your friends, and everyone who loves learning the truth. And remember, you can always find Black History Stories 13 right here on YouTube, where real history is brought to life. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep our stories alive.